Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you're in great company. We've got thousands of listeners who have a thirst for continuous improvement and raising standards in business. Whether your interest is in quality, sustainability, or risk standards, I'd love to welcome you as a member to our online platform for all things ISO, the ISology Hub. The ISology Hub is the leading place to get access to all of your online resources, from in-depth training courses through to our very popular coffee break training, to templates and action plans and many other resources to help raise standards. As a member, you get access to over 100 courses, taking you from learner to practitioner to leader. The ISology Hub has all the resources that you need, which will really help to make your life easier and to help improve compliance in those business critical areas. So if you'd like access to learning and compliance resources ranging from data privacy to environmental management, anti-bribery, business continuity, quality, health and safety, to name just but a few, the list is endless actually, then we'd love you to come and join us. Just head over to the isologyhub.com. In a world increasingly conscious of climate change and social responsibility, businesses are facing unprecedented scrutiny. A new European Union directive is set to shake up the corporate landscape, demanding unprecedented transparency and accountability. Welcome back to the new series of Understanding ESG Reporting. On today's episode of the ISO Show, we're going to be talking about the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, otherwise known as CSRD. So the CSRD is a significant piece of legislation that mandates companies to disclose detailed information about their environmental, social and governance performance. So what is CSRD? Well, the CSRD is a new EU directive that modernises and strengthens the rules concerning the social environmental information that companies have to report on. And yes, that does include the UK. It has been adopted by the UK and organisations need to comply with it if they're based in the UK. It revises the 2014 Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which is called the NFRD. So that's an acronym you may be familiar with. But this extends the scope of covered companies and strengthens the reporting requirements. But the CSRD was formally adopted by the European Council on the 28th of November 2022. So what does that actually mean? Well, the directive is transforming ESG reporting. We know that ESG is at the top of a lot of organisations' agendas now. A lot of organisations are providing reports on sustainability and ESG on an annual basis. Now, in the UK alone, this is going to be affecting 50,000 companies from 2024. So obviously that's going to be a much greater number across Europe. But by expanding the scope to include all large companies, all companies listed on regulated markets and non-EU companies with substantial activities in the EU, it basically applies to all of them. So this includes the non-EU companies with subsidiaries operating within the EU or those listed on EU regulated markets. So ultimately this is where the CSRD is starting, but it's likely that in the future that could be cascaded down into medium and smaller size organisations. So it's worth continuing to listen to this, even if you're not working for a large organisation, because this potentially is setting a precedence for ESG reporting in the future for all organisations. So how will the CSRD affect your emissions reporting? Well, under the CSRD, companies are required to report on their greenhouse gas emissions. So this includes scopes 1, 2 and 3. And for those of you that aren't that familiar with the definitions between scopes 1, 2 and 3, I'll just highlight what they are. But obviously we've covered a number of podcasts on carbon reporting in the past, specifically with Carbonology, who deal with the independent verification of greenhouse gas emissions. So I'd encourage you to go back and listen to some of those other podcasts if you want to get further information on quantifying your greenhouse gas emissions and producing reports on that. So just in summary, Scope 1 emissions are the direct emissions from owned or controlled sources. So for example, emissions from combustion, which is owned, or for example, controlled boilers and furnaces and vehicles, that sort of thing. Then you've got Scope 2 emissions. So they're indirect emissions from the generation of purchased energy. So for example, this includes emissions from the production of electricity, steam, heating and cooling consumed by the company. And finally, Scope 3. This is generally where we find that there's the most significant impact on the environment because that's through our supply chains. So Scope 3 is other indirect emissions that occur in a company's value chain. So it's those emissions that are as a result of your business activities. So that could include business travel, employees commuting, and waste disposal, for example. The CSRD does actually focus specifically not just on the reporting of your greenhouse gas emissions, but also the verification as well. So what are the emissions verification requirements for CSRD? Well, under the CSRD, companies are required to have their reported GHG emissions data verified by an independent third party. The verification process ensures the accuracy and reliability of the reported information. I have recorded a couple of episodes actually on verification because this is an area that Carbonology specialises in. So if you'd like to get further information on what's involved with verification, I did record an episode on to verify or not to verify. That is the question. So that's an interesting one to look at the difference between non-verified and verified reports. But just in summary, in terms of verification for CSRD, basically the requirement is for independent verification, and it's from companies that must engage with a third-party verifier to audit and confirm the accuracy of their greenhouse gas emissions reports. So this is ultimately being able to have somebody else check what your organisation is doing rather than marking your own homework. So what standards can you verify against? Well, the verification standards can be conducted in accordance with recognised international standards such as ISO 14064 Part 3. So ISO 14064-1 is the specification for the scoping, your boundaries, being able to deal with the quantification, reporting of your emissions and highlighting reductions. The Part 3 version of that standard is all about the verification of the Part 1, ultimately. It's also being quite clear on what your assurance levels are as well. So the verification should provide reasonable level of assurance that the emissions data is accurate and complete. So we are going to have another episode coming up on assurance levels with the principal carbonologist, David Algar, who'll explain the difference between limited and reasonable levels of assurance. And then also it covers the frequency of verification. So verification is required on an annual basis. So every 12 months you need to ensure that your data is accurate and completely transparent in terms of the methodology on an ongoing annual basis, and obviously in compliance with the CSRD. So these verification requirements are designed to enhance the credibility and transparency of the reported emissions data. So ultimately, ensuring that stakeholders can trust the information that's provided by organisations. So who qualifies for CSRD? Well, it actually applies to a broad range of companies, which is based on a few criteria. So I'm just going to take you through those. So the first one is companies listed on the regulated markets in the EU, excluding any listed micro-enterprises though. The second criteria is for large companies that are classified as those meeting at least 2 out of 3 conditions, and they are that your company either has more than 250 employees or a turnover of over 40 million euros or over 20 million in total assets. So if your organisation can tick 2 of those boxes, then your organisation would be eligible. So it does actually apply to certain SMEs. So they are SMEs, so small, medium enterprises that are listed. Okay, so although there is going to be a transitional period when SMEs can opt out until 2028. So if you're listed, you need to double check what the criteria is going to be in terms of compliance with CSRD. And it's also applicable to non-EU companies with a net turnover of 150 million in the EU. And so that also applies if you've got at least one subsidiary or branch within the EU. So hopefully that's provided you with an overview of CSRD. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that, I wouldn't say enjoy listening to this podcast, but obviously it is on a need-to-know basis that it's beneficial for you to have some visibility of the current sustainability reporting requirements for ESG, whether they affect you directly now or not, but they may affect organisations within the value chain that you operate within. So as we've discussed, this new EU regulation is set to significantly impact the way businesses operate and report on their ESG performance. Whether you're a business owner, investor, or simply interested in sustainability, it's clear that CSRD is a major development that will shape the future of corporate responsibility. If you'd like to learn more about the CSRD or explore related topics, please be sure to check out our website, www.carbonologyhub.com, or follow us on social media. So there'll be links within the show notes to the LinkedIn and Instagram feeds. We've also got a new course that's available that features the CSRD plus the wider range of ESG reporting requirements. So that does cover quite a number of sustainability reporting disclosures that you may need to be aware of. So again, just head over to the Carbonology website if you'd like further information on that. So thanks very much for listening today. We've got one more podcast in this series, which is relating to the corporate sustainability due diligence reporting requirements.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.